Gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Then and Now. I just want to say a warm welcome to all of you who are presently in the chat room on a very warm Sunday afternoon in the United Kingdom. It's unusual that we broadcast at this hour, but we all go know say today one of the highlights of the World Cup, one of the most watched, if not the most watched sports in the world. The final will be played today, and it will be played at 4 o'clock. And after 4, the winning side and those that supported the winning side obviously will be in the merry mood. So we decide for organize the program at about 2 o'clock this time, while everybody is sort of getting ready for watching what's supposed to turn out to be a beautiful game. I mean, the final two supposed to be a very exciting match. Normally, I don't do this, but I'm on the side of France, and if football not any justice in terms of the quality of players, the depth, the tactic, the commitment, then France. But football being stupid at times can go either way. But having said this, now we could broadcast this Sunday at 2 o'clock. Just before I go, as you can see some of the headlines where we get, I talk something about the 90 days and 100 days period. Well, this is not going to make a lot of people happy, but we just want to keep saying the truth or speaking the truth, because speaking the truth will do nothing else but set us free, which is this 90 days and 100 days period we talk about. I remember some 3 months ago when this party assumed office, I said 90 days to 100 days, that's what we have to give them. It's nothing new, but I don't believe it's everybody who is aware of this 90 days or 100 days, where we categorize as a honeymoon period. But suddenly after the 90 days, you hear like judgment being made, whereas judgment is not supposed to be made at this time, because this is not what the 90 days or 100 days is about at all. There's a fundamental error on the part of us, and we journalists, them have not done any good, especially the ones back home. They haven't done any good because they don't pass judgment based on the 90 days. What is 90 days or 100 days supposed to represent is the settling in. It's like when you say you picking go to school for the first time, whether in a nursery school, it takes time for them to settle in. When you go boarding home for the first time, it takes time for you to settle in. There's a period. Transition from primary school to secondary school, from secondary school to university. There's a transition period in which accommodations can be made, mistakes accepted. But we have gone far away with this one, and it's not supposed to be that. I just wanted to bring us back. This is a honeymoon period in which, like they rightfully said, in terms of the transitional reports, which we still read and try to understand, 136 page long, is a period where it's time for stock taking, time for auditing, time for the smooth transfer of power. That's the period that you give them. But having said this, that period is effectively now over, and that's what we said. We will begin to look at the manifesto, what they promised before the elections, after they were elected, what they said at their inauguration, and when they're in old power proper. That's when we begin to hold them accountable now. Today back on 101 day. So therefore, we begin this program of holding we leaders and responsible for what they've said, whether they've lived up to it, whether they're going to live up to it. That scrutiny starts now. And we start this with education. So we look at the brief history of Sierra Leone within the context of education, and then we go fast forward to where we are today. Okay? So most people, like I said, will not like it, but this is just the fact. Now take a step back and have a look. Yes, 90 days, 100 days. No, you don't make judgment. You don't make judgment. It's about a smooth transition from one phase to the other, from primary to secondary, from kindergarten to primary, from secondary to university. It's a transition period. After that period, no more mistakes are going to be accepted or a blame game like the Donald Trump kind of thing. They don't assume power ever since we don't get in 90 days or 100 days in office. It's still one for the points to Obama. No, no, no. It's the same thing with the Mada Bio government. After this 90 days to 100 days, he is no longer supposed to be pointing in the other direction. Blame, 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 because they will have said to me now. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to say this is what the 90 days to 100 days supposed to be all about. So, we'll begin for holding accountable. And today, I want to start with the issue of education, where Mada Bio, talk about very strongly. Na inaugural speech, na them how do you call it? Na them manifesto, and then also very strongly in part of as part of the new direction. Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of the country Sierra Leone, when we talk about education, those of us that are in the chat room now, those of us that will watch this clip later, and by the way, can we spread this clip because this is important, please? Can we invite family and friends, here to be a part of this program this Sunday afternoon so that they can watch or possibly contribute to this program, please? Let's spread, and I will look at the comments then in the chat room, for try for monitor waiting to go on, so I'm able for responding kind. So I think I need for move on now because my short broadcast in a way. So as we know education, those of us who were born during that era, and even those that came after, that read about education in the country, it was one of the proudest things that was attributed to that country called Sierra Leone. Our neighbors, they envied us. And I mean this in every respect. They envied us. And I use the word, the emphasis is mine, envy. They envied us. We called ourselves, or we were known at the time, for being the Athens of West Africa. But suddenly, that Athens was to descend in a chaotic order to find ourselves in the present predicament in which we are now, where we are almost the laughing stock of people that once admired us. So let me provide a brief history, first of all, so we know where we are and what we look up to. Because the reason why we decide for highlight this, these governments don't make them an onus and a prerogative that education will be free. Not only free, but they will lay emphasis on them so much so that they will lift the people when they go to school now, or the nation as a whole, from the present state that education finds itself to another level where, of course, it can't be as it were before, but far better. So the question would be, can they? So therefore, I want to provide a brief background. Those of us that read history then, and possibly, probably now, the introduction of education in the Republic of Sierra Leone was established in 1808. And again, those of us that read the history books, F.K. Bois, etc., knows that in 1808, Sierra Leone became a British Crown colony. So education, we know, predates the establishment of the Crown colony when we became a Crown colony. Okay? We also learned from our history books that in 1804, there was a school set up for freed slaves. For freed slaves. And by the way, let me just highlight this quickly. I said, that education predates the establishment of the Crown colony. In other words, we had a form of education. It was traditional, if you like. Things that we go attribute to the Bondo society today, where it's not only about the knife or the razor, but it was a kind of an institution which has survived thousands of years. And then the poorer society, these were all institutions of learning in which young men were to go in and learn something about which we will refer today as education. But for fast track and again, ladies and gentlemen, in 1808, after we became a British colony, a school had already been set up for freed slaves. That was back then in 1804. And it was started by church missionaries who had begun coming into the country from a society from this very country where we are, the United Kingdom, formerly called England. From that point on, the CMS, was to spread all of its efforts into many areas. It began, first of all, along the coast. It makes sense because that's where they landed when they came, you know, with their ships and boats and what you want to call it. They landed along the coastline. So they had an impact along the coastline before they made their way up into the countryside. Okay, before they made their way up into the countryside. 150 years later, many other religious bodies became part of this journey. You want to name them, but a few like the Baptists, the Catholics, the Methodists, to whom I subscribe, followed by the CMS. There are other examples of other people who were not Christian related. This would be the Islamic organizations. They too follow suit, but much more later with the pioneering efforts of the local madrasa schools that we found in our country, like the Ahmadiyya, for example, things that we are really, really proud of, things that have held us together, the very fabric of the society in terms of religious tolerance, one of the countries with a unique blend of religion in which Muslims and Christians, vis-a-vis Christians and Muslims, they flourish together. They are in it for the good, they are in it for the bad. Shoulder to shoulder with respect for one another, which you can only find in a few countries. The rest I don't know, but I know definitely that this is happening or used to happen possibly in Sierra Leone because they see Lily Strains there now. Okay? One of the pride of the countries then, I said then, because a lot of this is lost. FBC, Furabe College, goodness me. Okay? This provided the first formal university education in West Africa. Did you hear me, ladies and gentlemen? Furabe College provided the first formal university education in West Africa in modern times. And remember that Furabe College, again, is all in history, and I don't intend lecturing history here because most of us will be aware anyway. But I'm just trying to create the premise on which this topic is based on today, so that when we arrive finally, we know where we came from and where we are, if you will allow me, please. So Furabe College obviously was founded in 1827, okay? And it was concerned basically or primarily with Christian activities which you will refer to as belonging to Christianity. That's the education, form of education that it provided in its early days. And until 1968, ladies and gentlemen, it was still affiliated, and I repeat, it was still affiliated with the great Durham. Some people will call it Durham, but Harvard Englishmen call it Durham. That's D-U-H-R-A-M. D-U-R-H-A-M University here in England. One of the topmost universities in England. That's the university that the Furabe College was associated with up to 1968. That's a few years after I was born. I've been around for quite a while, ladies and gentlemen. The Furabe College was to later extend its doors or open its doors into other fields. It served the needs of a substantial number. It served the needs of a substantial number of people, of students, if you like, but mainly to English West African speaking countries. So if we look around, most people that got their education at the time, they derived it from Furabe College, especially those from the English-speaking countries at the time. Because Furabe College was at the center of university education in the entire West Africa for many, many years. So this lent pride to the Republic of Sierra Leone. This act alone did lend pride to the country Sierra Leone. Secondary school education, ladies and gentlemen, institutions were equally established. Because remember, it wasn't only Furabe. And after all, this was a higher form of education, although it started humbly, you're somewhere down the line to provide education for mainly Christian people, but it also extended its arms, it's opened its doors to other people as well. Okay. So what really happened, you know, yeah, there were other primary and secondary educational institutions which were equally established and had a reputation in the region. That's how critically important that country was. So other educational institutions, very critical to the education of the country and applicable to others around the region as well, were already up and running. Just to name a few, which you will know already, were the Sierra Leone Grammar School. Wow. The grammarians, if any one of them are watching now, will be excited, because when you talk about the history of education in Sierra Leone, the grammar school was one of the first and was very predominant, very renowned, quality education for many, many years. It was established in 1845. These are history that I know, but this is history that I read a long time ago because I was very much interested in all of this as a boy. Then came the Annie Walsh Memorial School. Wow, Annie Walsh. That even when we traveled away from home many, many years ago, you could hear the name Annie Walsh on the lips of foreign nationals. Many, many years ago, 30 years ago plus, when we travel outside of the country, you could hear the names of these schools like Annie Walsh, proper girls' school that was the envy of most West African nations, okay? It was organized in 1840, okay? That was 5 years before grammar school. Then, of course, the school which we've spoken about a lot, which is very central to the government of today. But that's not the way I want to speak about it. I only mention it because it was also a very renowned institution of learning. Okay. People have started sending me attachments, and I like to follow the flow at some point while I'm going on. Yes, Mr. Kamara, welcome to the program, sir. I'm just seeing some attachments that have been sent to me. So I'm just trying to do follow-up at the same time. Very interesting. I wish you could get to see this. Goodness. Anyway, we need to continue with the program. I was just talking about Annie Walsh for girls. I think I made an error with the date it was founded. Not 1840 rather, it's 1849. It was founded 4 years after the Sierra Leone Grammar School was founded. So that was in 1849. And then you have the Bow Government School, which was formed in 1906, which was the crème de la crème, because while the others were based in the capital, Freetown, this was based in the hinterland, okay? And it was a majestic school in every respect, because away from the capital, up there in the countryside, the chiefs, who were very powerful men and women then, this school was the center for them and their kids, okay? So that's how majestic Bow School was back then in 1906. And then you had the Prince of Wales, which was formed or founded 1 year before the Bow School. But when the Prince of Wales, commonly known as POW, was found, that was to commemorate the first visit of British royalty into that country in 1905. This attracted the attention for quality education of all kinds of standards from all over West Africa. This is how we came to be known as the Athens of West Africa, and sometimes beyond, but largely in West Africa. The spread of education, ladies and gentlemen, in the country, both in the number of institutions and the quality of these educations, of these educational facilities that these new schools provided, and made the country to focus mainly on learning in the particular region where we belong, which is the West African side of things. Remember, it's an entire continent, and we just in a quarter of the continent, which is known as the West African side. And like I said earlier, not only was it about West Africa, but largely, as it were, for West Africa, mostly, sometimes, you could hear the name of this country in a good way, not as today, spoken in other parts of the world, even here in the United Kingdom. Okay? The name Sierra Leone was mentioned in a good way. You could take your education that you have acquired in Sierra Leone and bring it here into the West. Because imagine if the University of Durham here in the United Kingdom was a partner with Forabe College, which simply means that if you acquire your education in Sierra Leone, okay, that paper is well respected here in this land. And it was not too far away, not too far long ago. Sometimes our nurses, because we have classical nursing schools, well respected. When they travel abroad to work, they don't have to go through all the rigorous form of checks in terms of their educational background and etc. Their papers were automatically accepted. That's what it were then. That's what it is now, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it was. That's what it were. And all of that, at this point in time, we seem to have lost that. Not even seem, we have lost that. A substantial number of English-speaking West African students were at the center of university education in Sierra Leone. For several years, people came. It was like a mecca of education in West Africa. Yes, I think I found the right word. Like a mecca of education in West Africa, where citizens came from all over, be it in not only West Africa, Africa as a whole. The Ethiopians were there, the South Africans were there, the Kenyans were there, okay? And this is the East. The Ugandans were there, the Zambians were there. They all came to Sierra Leone. It will surprise you, but yes, indeed, this is a fact. This is a fact. Secondary school education as well, after these institutions have been established, also attracted all forms of students from all over the place. Okay, from Guinea-Bissau, from East Africa, I've just talked about, which will embrace Kenyans, Tanzanians, because at the time the struggle was still waging, and we were providing this backdrop for people to come and learn. Ladies and gentlemen, at independence in 1961 and almost a decade thereafter, much had been achieved. Much had been achieved in the construction of educational facilities, the enrollment of children, and the training of students in various fields. Echoes that we are hearing, we are beginning to hear again, which is going to prompt us to ask the question, which we will ask in a few minutes' time. This trend I've just spoken of, it kept pace despite faulty statistics. Okay? Despite faulty statistics about literacy level and enrollment in schools. I am just going to the point where education started descending into chaos gradually, because it was a gradual process. It was indeed a gradual process. Just want to say hi to a couple of people on the channel. PD Sachs, my brother, how you doing? Mr. Yusuf Mansari, how are you? How you doing, my brother? I hope all is well. For those of you who are just joining, of course, the headline is there. We're talking about the political history of Sierra Leone within the context of education. Education, we know, is significant for any nation, because without education, we can make no advancements. We can make no developments. But at the same time, I would equally like to mention that education, Sister Esther Johnson, welcome to the program, that education as well is being misinterpreted. sometimes deliberately, by others who does not want us to know. There is a famous parable in my country. It says education is better than silver and gold, but it's also the funny side to it, in which those who were telling us that education is better than silver and gold, we are taking the silver and gold, and they kept us busy with education. A brother who normally is on this channel as well, I'm not sure whether he's here today. We've had many discussions over the years in which, my eyes were not open to that, but he was able to open my eye to it, saying, we spent all this time studying about grasshopper. Remember, those of you my age group, we spent time learning how to draw grasshopper, learning how to draw butterflies, learning how to draw various, insects. And what benefits were those to us in the longer run? It's a testimony of how misinterpreted, how misinformed we were. So we could have directed this energy into vocational institutions, because I'm not kicking against education, not for once. I'm a benefactor of it, but I'm very independent as well, because I got a different take. If your education, you tend to think it's just going into university and acquiring degrees, okay, and becoming scientists that cannot, you're doing anything relating to science, an engineer that will do nothing relating to being an engineer, building bridges, and anything engineering related, then that education is meaningless. An education in which you cannot help in the development of your country is meaningless. So education can come in different forms. It can be technical, it can be vocational. It's not only about the classroom. And this is quite critical. But for many decades, ladies and gentlemen, we've dwelled into this form of education, and this has not helped us at all. And somewhere along the line, this education of ours became very, very corrupt. It became very corrupt. I was just saying that by 1961, after independence, and much more a decade after, we started developing on what was left of us. Remember, I mentioned independence and what was left of us. But soon this was to descend into chaos. By 1980, a period which saw, and this is the beginning of the visual effect, because something was already happening in the late 1970s, but in the early 1980s, it became visual. It became physical. You could feel it. It saw many economic and social aspects of our country in decline. It's sometimes difficult to talk about this because you'll be attributing to a particular period, and it doesn't go down well. But ladies and gentlemen, if we should have a conversation, okay, then we have to reconcile with our past. For only in doing so can we understand what went wrong and how we can move on from the morass and the bankruptcy of our morality. That's the only way. So sometimes when we speak the truth, it's inconvenient, but we have to say it anyhow. And when we say it, we don't say it with any form of malice. We only say it so that we can understand as a people how we can embrace ourselves without pointing blame or fingers of blame at someone else, but understanding the matter and trying to move it forward so that eventually our people can benefit from this. So I was saying that in the 1980s, it became obvious that the nation was in decline. And so massive was the decline that education, as we knew it, was already taking its fair share in the society. There was a national downturn, ladies and gentlemen. I say this with a degree of emotion because I saw education when education was at a peak in that country. I saw education when education was the envy of other nationals, of other nations, both within and afar. I saw it. So when I speak, I'm saying it from deep inside me, not just from the books, not just from the research materials, but also as a witness, because all of this happened in my time. The growing number of Malays in the schools and on the campuses over poor conditions, it reflected on the trend that I'm talking about. It was a trend that contributed to the decline of the late President of the Republic, Dr. Siaka Probin Stevens. And this led to his eventual retirement. Ladies and gentlemen, bear in mind I'm talking about the political history of the country. So when we mention names, when we mention parties, we don't mention these things with malice. But like I said, it's for us to embrace ourselves and understand what went wrong, how it went wrong, and how can we fix a broken system together. This is the only reason why I'm mentioning it. And because it's written, I'm not making it up. It's there in the books. If you go to Forabe College in the archives, you will find this historical narrative that I'm talking about there. And there are other materials elsewhere. Like in British Museum, some of these materials are there. You can go there and find it and find them for yourselves. If you go to Google Scholar, you will find some of these materials that I'm talking about. So ladies and gentlemen, in the transition to the new order, this is from Siaka Stevens to President Momoh. The late, may their souls rest in peace, and much respect to them because they were our former leaders. They are still in the book of history, in the annals of history. You can't talk about the history of that country without mentioning these people. But from that transitional order from Siaka Stevens to President Momoh, there was apathy among students. And this apathy was deeply already seated in these students. There was little manifest, ladies and gentlemen, in the enthusiasm for change. I'm talking about that change that took place between the transition between Siaka Stevens and Joseph Saidu Momoh. You know, normally when a transition takes place, when something is happening which is not good for the country, in which there is some kind of a decline, and then a change takes place, especially a political change, which is meant to usher in a new era. But with that time and that one, people were not happy. They didn't find it, something to celebrate about. That's what I meant by there was deep apathy among the students, which was already deeply rooted in them. So there was little manifest to show some kind of enthusiasm for that particular change that took place then at the time. Because there was suspicion and there was lack of faith in the political system to effect the desired changes, which was very pervasive at the time. I'm saying this and stressing it because decades on, we find ourselves in a similar situation. Although, again, there has been a change this time, not within the same party, but from one party to the other, but the question could still be asked. Are they two cheeks of the same backside, or are we going to see a difference this time around? Okay? It is a political system in which we've seen both parties in action before. So we can equally count their mishaps, their successes, if any, because we know them, they are no strangers. Reasons why some people called for a third force some time ago was to see something new altogether, away from this duopoly of the All People's Congress, APC, and the Sierra Leone People's Party, the SLPP. But unfortunately, it's the two that we've got, so it's the two that we keep talking about, and for some time to come, at least 5 years on, this is what we are going to be talking about. So what began as a gradual neglect for the needs of education, it gathered a momentum by 1985. That's when Siaka Stevens passed on the baton. There was an international development agency project by the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen. some of the history is really laughable. And that was under the United Nations Development Program, which was carefully worked out by the Ministry of Education for an increase in facilities and student enrollment. And this was founded in 1982. A review of aspects of the project, the cost was unwarranted. Okay, there's somebody just joining us. Welcome to the program, my dear sister. So it was unwarranted. Government's counterpart financial contribution was not only irregular, so it was like this is almost like, it's laughable, not almost laughable. You form a partnership, to promote or finance a project. So you have to make your contribution as opposed to another partner. So in this project, that was about education back in 1982. The IDA project, some of you may be familiar with it, which is the International Development Agency project, a carefully crafted plan under the United Nations Development Project. The government of Sierra Leone, it might matter how bad things were, could not even come up with their contribution to this particular project. So as a consequence of that, that project had to be grounded. What a disgrace. A real disgrace, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it were. Sister Alice Bendu, welcome to the program. Brother Melvin Medsiga, welcome to the program. First time around. You're very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, the lines are open. If anyone should have a question or want to participate or want to make a contribution to the program, they can. I'm talking about the political history for those of you who are just signing on now. I'm talking about the political history of Sierra Leone within the context of education. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the same topic within the context of corruption, and this is going to continue because next week we'll be talking about the genesis of corruption within the Sierra Leone civil services. That's what we're going to be talking about next week. And this is serious, but today we're talking about education, how a proud nation of people, okay, a country whose educational system was known as the Athens of West Africa, and even beyond, to whose shores many a national came to learn, to acquire tangible, quality education, became the scourge of a nation, the laughingstock of a nation, the decadence, moral decadence of a nation. And today, here we are. So we're talking about the changing of God. I was just talking about projects, just mentioned one of them, how abysmal it was then, how rubbish it was then. That a project that the government signed up to with the United Nations Development Program, when it came to time for them to produce their half of the bargain, in other words, to produce their own subscription, disgracefully, they could not come up with it. They could not. So we know that by 1987 sounds like almost a long time ago, but it isn't in terms of what we are talking about. The disillusionment, ladies and gentlemen, of students or among students revived the disturbances that were so common in the Siaka Stevens era. In the Siaka Stevens era, I was part and parcel of a disturbance. When I say part and parcel of a disturbance, not that I took part in the disturbance because I was pretty young then. By then I was in Albert Academy in 1977. And I physically saw it, the roadblocks, because we were in school, I believe, when it started in 1977. And that's just the road upway to Frabe College, where those geniuses of our time, those brothers and sisters who had every right to protest because of the system, which was not doing them any good, started this rioting that was to spread all over the place. That was in 1977. So we are talking about a decade on that disillusionment that I saw as a boy, probably 12 was it then, among students, revived the disturbances of my era. In February of 1987, ladies and gentlemen, in February of 1987, President Momoh faced unrest on the streets. It started off on the campuses. There was a replay of the 1977 student disorder and the poor handling of the situation. Same thing in 1977. It's the same thing. It mirrored everything that happened in 1987 of February. They always misjudge the students. And they always handle this protest wrongly. So every time they handle it wrongly, these things got out of hand and they could not contain it. So it broke large and was all over the place. It resulted into violent incidents, ladies and gentlemen. And this did not only happen in the capital, it also happened in the provinces. In Bo at the time, I can recall, the All People's Congress Party office was burned down. And the provincial secretary's office, along with the provincial secretary, their offices were burned down. Yes, in 1987, it was all on the news. It made the BBC at the time. I can remember that because by then, I was politically active in my own right and was following these things. The discontent among students spread to workers. You see, that's where it started and spread to workers. It's like the making of a revolution. Because it's not only the students that were in this. Do you see the correlation there? But of course, if the parents could not be paid a fair share of the national cake, a fair sum for the hard labor, there won't be a positive reflection on their kids and kids, on their children that were attending school then. So they felt the pain. They felt the pain more than the younger ones. But because of how will I call it? Because of intelligence, and there's another word I'm trying to find. Experience is not even the word, but resilience. I think resilience would be appropriate. They kept it on the wraps because it was their duty to protect their children. But when the children could hold no more, and when the center could hold no more, it broke loose. And they had no alternative but to join their kids in expressing their dismay and their unacceptance of the current, of the then status quo. It was violent, okay? It spread all over the country. It didn't even waste no time. It was like wildfire. Okay. At the Mabas sugar factory, I was just talking. This is why this came up to my head. I was talking, you know, while trying to look for paperwork for the manuscript of this program. I was talking to somebody who worked at the Mabas factory there. We were just talking about the entire episode, and then Mabas factory came up. So they also went on strike, by the way. Public workers in Mabas factory, they went to strike. Teachers, students, the general public. They destroyed vehicles and they burned down houses of senior officers. Such was how people were upset if they could do this. You know, when you look back, you think, well, the destruction, why would they do this? There could have been a peaceful way. Well, I'm for peaceful demonstration. I'm for peaceful protest. But sometimes the act in itself belies what is going on. How many times did those people never express peacefully what was their disagreement, their discontent? And the state was not improving at all. It wasn't. This was an act of desperation. The mounting problems, not the least, the dubious numbers of teachers. That's the essence of corruption, trying to go down the corruption lane. So, civil servants have found a way on how to inflate. We heard this as children. I heard this as a boy. Okay? Expanding salary budget which led to the education of workers, census, commission of inquiry, which was chaired then by Dr. Toker. It was chaired by Dr. Peter Toker. That was back then in March 1988. He presented a report to government. Ladies and gentlemen, the findings was unbelievable then, but it was real. The findings was unbelievable then, but it was real. Among some of the things that Dr. Peter Toker found were visible inconsistencies between what the commission discovered, and the advanced information provided by the Ministry of Education. That's the Ministry of Education provided, because there were so many thieves within the ministry, what we call anyampis within the ministry. Imagine, they had no feeling, they had become psychopaths any longer. They had no feelings for their people. Little wonder why people went on the rampage, burning down buildings and vehicles, not belonging to the poor masses, but belonging to these very thieves. These were what they targeted. So they produced a report. And when Dr. Peter Toker's Commission of Inquiry produced their report, they find inconsistencies between the Ministry of Education then and Dr. Toker's Commission and Discovery. Okay? For instance, there was a total number of primary schools given by the ministry, which was noted as 1,436. What did the commission find? It found the number to be 1,952. It sounds like the commission found more while the education ministry found less. Reason why, can barely understand why it was, because we're talking about the inflation of bills. So the government was paying more almost to non-existent nature of structures, but was going into the pockets of private individuals. But for the primary school enrollment, the ministry claimed the number to be 700,000. So probably they were mixing and matching, trying to massage, because now you can see now how inflated this number was, probably to cover the other side, because they need to cover their trail. That's how professional they have become. So sometimes just to confuse the audit trail. So they found 700,000, close to 1 million. But the commission found that the actual number was 382,000. The actual number was 382,000. That's almost half that number. So half that number was an inflated bill that people were being paid privately. Those in position, the civil servants, the PAMSECs, money that was going into their pockets. It's really, really unfortunate. Really unfortunate. And there's so much statistics to this that I really don't want to go into, to be honest. I really don't want to go into, because that's the nature of our history. And that was there. Yes, Mr. Tampakiwa, of course, for the good of the country. That's why we are highlighting them. Somebody just reading somebody's comments. Just reading somebody's comments. Of course, Mr. Frederick Coy. we know that you are in Freetown, sir. Yeah, Tampakiwa, you are absolutely right. We just need to pray. But I don't only believe in prayers. It's not like I don't believe in prayers, not only believe in prayers. If this is another thing, we'll make it a topic for another day. We cannot be praying for things that we can do, because, to be honest, this is what we continue to do all these many years. We find ourselves in churches praying for things that we can do. For example, we want to build schools. School is a physical thing that can be done. It's a tangible thing that can be done. We can sit down and make our plans. It's not spiritual, it's physical. We find people, we organize a project, find a chairman for the project, get members of the committee, assign, give all of them assignments on what to do in terms of a project. We do feasibility study. We find a place, buy the place, look for money, how to get the money, make estimates, look for engineer, do an estimate, quantitative survey. You know, it's all documented and it's doable just by sitting around the table and talking about it. You don't have to go spend hours in church. You don't have to go spend days in church. Come on. These are all things, you know, that are basic and we need to learn. We need to learn these. Yes, we can pray in our quiet time. Yes, we can worship. But things that we can do for God's sake, we just need to get on to do it. Brother Frederick Coy, welcome to the program, watching all the way from Freetown. Absolutely, sir. I respect you and I hope that you're having a great time. And I know you're having a great time. Olina Joe, this is a first timer, and I want to welcome you to the program. Welcome. I hope we will see you again. Sister Mariama George, welcome to the program. For those of you joining again, we're talking about the political history of Sierra Leone within the context of education, our country that was once known as the Athens of West Africa, a country that was producing scientists, that was producing engineers, poets, barristers, accountants, doctors, nurses, all sorts of professions that you can imagine, which was not only appreciated and accepted within the country itself, but was accepted outside of the country. What do I mean by this? You will have graduated in any field, any discipline in Sierra Leone. You come abroad with your certificate, your diploma, your transcript, and you will find some sort of employment or some sort of enrollment depending on what you are trying to pursue. But it's not anymore, so that's what we are talking about. That's exactly what we are talking about here today. And we'll soon end. We are almost approaching the hour mark, okay? And I was just giving some statistics, and I can't go on because there are many. But we equally know that another aspect of education problem in the country is the continuous negative attitude. The continuous negative attitude to the teacher and his working condition. We will see that this government, somewhere along the line, the head of state have said, I'm talking about the present government, have said that he will address those particular issues. So one of the issues that were noted there was how one part of the problem was the continuous negative attitude to the teacher and his working condition. You know, I come from a fine tradition of teachers. My grandpa was a teacher. My mom was a teacher. My dad was a teacher. One or two of my sisters were teachers. My brother, my elder brother, was a teacher. My uncles, my aunts. So I come from a fine tradition of teachers. So when I see this, I know. Because then, I know it was a profession that was highly respected, highly regarded. But somewhere down the line, it became the scourge that we're talking about. It became what I'm talking about right now as the negative attitude to the teacher and his working condition was always negative. There was a negative attitude both from parents and students themselves. To put it strongly, straightforward, no respect for the profession. A profession that was once honored, that was once respected, that was once held in high regard, was no longer the same. And I've just said I came from a fine tradition of teachers. All my parents were teachers. My dad was a professor, political science. Before then, he taught at the police school with the late K2 Smith and others. Before police school, he taught at secondary school. He helped to form schools and mold minds. Some of them are within the class of leadership today. My mom was also a teacher. She was a trained nurse and later became a teacher, taught at primary level. My aunt or aunties, a lot of them were teachers. Uncles, sisters, brother. I'm the only one that never went into the classroom to teach. I ain't got no patience. And by the time I came off it, that's when the attitude towards teachers are negative. The working conditions are poor. So obviously I can't fit in there. But this is what I'm trying to talk about. So what was once considered a symbol of respect and achievement, it gradually became, or teachers gradually became members of an underclass society, largely ignored and despised. Little wonder why people don't want to go into the profession any longer. Doesn't it take rocket science for you to understand this? I say again that I know what I'm talking about because of my lineage, because of my roots in terms of this once upon a time noble profession. Okay? The salaries of these people never changed. It remained a mere pittance. Only the faithful remained true. There were few people who remained true to the cause. There's another friend of mine always joked that there was a teacher. He never got a university degree because again at the time it wasn't really necessary, but he had all the certificates that you can think of, and he held those with pride and could talk about them with pride and was ready at the go to present them. A number of certificates, that one could attain at the time. But of course, because of the demoralization of this noble profession, okay, there was no conviction. There were no readily made replacements. People were backing away from teaching. So obviously, that also led to the demise of a once proud tradition, which made a nation to stand out both within and without. Ladies and gentlemen, having said this, is equally worth saying that more than any other factor, the deterioration in the system has without any doubt been a direct result of the indifference of the political leadership. The blueprints for transforming the system, such as the 1973 Sierra Leone Education Review, all the future have been largely ignored. So a review was ordered then. They found the cure to the disease. And that's another thing. We are always talking about the symptoms. For goodness sake, we know what the symptom is or are, because it's not only related to one aspect of our society, the broader spectrum of our society. We know what the symptom of our society as a whole is. We should be talking about solutions, but many, many decades on, we continue to talk about the symptoms instead of the cure. That in itself cannot sustain for long. So the review board that was set up back in the 1970s, all what they represented, all what they projected, all what they put forth, all what they advised, or soundly rejected because you had a bunch of anyampis in there who just will not accept it. Okay? Because accepting it will put their business out of, will put them out of business. Their pockets will go dry. So all our future have been, all of what they presented was largely ignored. Despite successive reminders to successive ministers who came one after the other, because they were being done like a musical chair, one after the other. In truth, ladies and gentlemen, the ministry which formulated these policies consistently demonstrated a sensitivity to the issues to which a government more interested in gold and diamond scarcely responded. Did you hear me? That government was more interested in diamond and gold, desperate for diamond and gold, other than the education. Education was sinking to an all-time low right in front of their eyes, but they were more focused on other aspects of the society, that's acquiring wealth and enriching themselves at the expense of the many. There has never been a shortage of ideas and plans in the system. Of course, there will never, just as we see now, but probably we're hoping that it will be different. Then, all kinds of committees were being formed in good faith. President Momo knew that he was a failure. He tried to recant. He showed penitence, sometimes publicly. He set up committees, but the mistake is, or was, these committees were headed by the same Ayampis, so they went nowhere. Such were the kind of people that were surrounding the man and undermining his efforts. So every time they come up with new ideas, it will crush or crash, because all these new ideas, these committees that were formed, were done by people who had no integrity, no moral conscience, whose intent was only based on being selfish and acquiring wealth for themselves. The caucus integrated science, ideas, and social studies projects in the country. It received international acclaim as one of the best in the world. You know how proud a nation can be when things of this nature are attributed to you, acclaimed by the world over. This gives you pride. This gives you a special place in the community of nations. The constant difficulties in management and financing of schools led to a proposal in July. It led to a proposal in July in 1990. Yes, it led to a proposal in July of 1990, the transfer of the management of most schools to private proprietors. The proposal, which was expected to take effect in September 1990, was never realized due to endless arguments over the modalities of implementation. Same thing. They cannot just agree, because how do we implement this if others who are not supposed to belong to the committee are there? In other words, first thing in their minds is how to loot. So the few against the many. So because of the selfishness of this very few, none of these projects took off. So there were no agreement on the modalities of implementation. So another good cause, another good project, back in July of 1990, which was supposed to be effected in September of 1990, crashed because there was no agreement between them. Meanwhile, while all of this was going on, there's been instability in the system. Just continue, because people were largely disgruntled. By November of 1991, teachers, you can remember this, were on a nationwide strike all over the place. Teachers abandoned the classroom. It's like, well, this is just too much. We can't take this anymore. We've tried. We know the consequences. We know the effects. But going back in the classroom will be a false anomaly, because we will not be teaching the children. The conditions are not right. So it's better we be out here in your faces striking for what we believe in than being in there. So by November 1991, teachers were all over the streets instead of the classrooms, striking for better pay, remuneration of services, good services that they were providing, respect, dignity, among others. Even the Minister of Education then, Mr. William Compton, who was an experienced educator. You remember the minister in 1990, Mr. William, was an experienced educator. He had no alternative. Yeah, Arun Pape, welcome, my brother. He had no alternative but to concede that teachers will withhold work or withholding work or deserting the classrooms because of conditions of services was understandable as the Minister of Education. He expressed his feeling and thoughts. He shared his feeling. He empathized with the teachers. Remember, he was the Minister of Education serving in the government and siding with the teachers. He said it publicly that a protest of the teachers in terms of their work conditions then, deserting the classroom, was understandable. These teachers were being paid mere pittances, to be quite honest, and they were being paid mere pittances and they need to be paid better. Okay? They need to be paid better. And I want to quote him at the time. He said that they were being paid mere pittances, and I quote, to be quite honest, and they needed to get not only better salaries, but better allowances, bonus, and fringe benefits, unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, the spread of education in the country, both in the number of institutions and the quality of these, made the country a focus of learning. We can't say this anymore than we've said it from the beginning of the show. Mainly in the region, in some cases beyond, and it earned us the name, the anthems of West Africa. It was a reputation that it was to justify right up to the eve of independence. So all the movements that were going on around Africa, West Africa and Africa, in terms of independence, I'm talking about the struggle for independence. Most of those fighters, those freedom fighters, sent their kids and kids to Sierra Leone to learn because they know education will help to emancipate them. That was the understanding then. So they all made their way down to the West. The late 50s and early 60s, I'm talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to repeat this, that I come from a fine tradition of teachers. Mom, dad, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunties, all were teachers. But when they thought the profession was noble, the profession of which my dad, my mom, my sisters and brother, my aunts, my uncles were a part of, was a proud one, because by the time they were producing doctors, journalists, teachers, administrators, journalists, engineers, and you name it. All over the place, with respect, all abroad. A far cry from today, in which half-baked are being pumped out of the system with no convictions at all. These are the kind of people that are being produced today. Brains that are meant to be molded for national service tomorrow are reduced to mere nothings. Every time I go down, I visit institutions. Okay? My primary journey started from Holy Trinity on Kisi Road. Okay? That's where it started, just opposite Annie Walsh. I was to matriculate later to Cathedral Boys School by Victoria Park. Every time I go down, I visit, and the building is a mere shadow of its own self. And every time I go there, I draw memories, of the time when we used to walk in starch, well-ironed khaki uniforms with red bindings and make our way to the Sacred Heart Cathedral, where I used to be like a reader. I've forgotten the exact title, with all my badges, prefect, merit, good conduct, line up, for my achievements. Proud there. So I speak of an era that I was very much a part of, and there are emotions every time I speak about it. So that's a far cry from today, like I was saying, in which half-baked people are being produced out of the system. They have no convictions at all. There's a brain drain in the country, okay? Brains that were meant to be molded, made, created for service to the nation come tomorrow, and now mere nothings. They are all indulged or engaged in in different activities other than schooling. So which we have to blame the system itself. So these children are more like playing Mercury or talking about football in faraway lands, or how to go on a perilous journey to make it into Europe, because their country, their countries have actually failed them, and in this case, our country has failed them. The prospect, ladies and gentlemen, is really scary. What it appears like is like the country, and this is the thing, and I hope people will understand this. You see, when it comes to my country, I'm a nationalist. I embrace everybody, everything, but when it comes to my country, I'm a nationalist. There are a few things that I don't admire him per se, but there are a few things that I see with him in common. Or in fact, just one. And that's that nationalistic feeling. So, but the difference between he and myself is I embrace others. But there's a bar. In this case, our institutions is a mere shadow of its former self. These children that are meant to be molded for tomorrow's leadership are no longer available. When you listen to names that are being produced these days from the schools, the colleges, the universities, they hardly bear the indigenous names as we know them before. It's just difficult for you to hear the Maras, the Banguras, the Kokas, the Kokas, the Koromas, the Turains. So that sends a cold chill down your spine or my spine. Because if these people that are being channeled out now are citizens, then it's obvious that they are tomorrow's leaders. So then it becomes a question of who tomorrow's leaders are. Which direction will they be taking the country? This prospect, ladies and gentlemen, is scary. It will appear that the country is being prepared by and for foreigners, and it seems like it's only a matter of time. This is when things are beyond you. You call for the help of God Almighty. So I can say, Father God, help us. But as gloomy though as the situation might seem, there should be a commitment, a political commitment on the part of leadership in the country with a clearly defined sense of educational priority. As Alison Cisse wrote once upon a time in a West African magazine, the country's past education glory can definitely be recaptured and Sierra Leone can once again become the Athens of West Africa. This is a tall order. It's not impossible, it's a tall order. That's Alison Cisse writing once upon a time in the West Africa magazine. But there we go. The SLPP government, which is now in power, have promised a lot regarding the subject matter which we've just spoken about today. We will continue or begin to monitor the free education and school system and watch whether Sierra Leone will at least capture, in the words of Alison Cisse, some of its past glory in education and restore the country, making it once more to become the Athens of West Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier on, for those of you who joined later, it's important to highlight this, that I said that the 90 days, 100 days period, which most, I suppose some people will not agree with, but I spoke about this some 3 months or 4 months ago. 3 months ago when the SLPP government won power. And what we need to understand, some of us have rushed to judgment. To me, it's a misconception, it's a misrepresentation of that phrase, the 90-100 days in office. There's a reason why they call it the honeymoon period. I'm just highlighting now because I'm about to land and finish. The reason why they call it the honeymoon period is metaphoric in many respects. but can be used in that context, which is, it's a learning process, it's a transitional process, it's a stock-taking process, it's an auditing process. Remember, when you are transitioning or your child is transitioning, be it from kindergarten to primary, it's a period to settle in. Or from secondary, primary to secondary, or from secondary to university, or traveling from one end to the other, or taking a job opportunity. Sometimes we give you 3 months or how many months of probation period. There is a reason beyond this. So I'll take it that was a settling in period for them. But that settling in period is over now. Today marks their 101 day in office. And as the sitting government, it is incumbent of us as a people to ask those inconvenient questions. No matter how uncomfortable it makes one feels, if we are asking questions or on a trajectory which represent the many and not the few, I think we should do it with bold convictions. And this is where we are beginning to look, and I mentioned this in subsequent broadcasts many weeks ago, that we will take a look at their manifesto. What did they promise us? What did they say they were going to do? How did they say they were going to do what they were going to do? We say we'll take a look at the president's inaugural address. What did he outline in that address? How did he say what he was going to do? Now we are going to begin to hold the SLPP accountable, and it will only be fair that we do so now, not then. For no longer can we accept them pointing finger at the APC government anymore. We're not saying that the APC government is not going to be mentioned, but after 3 months and 100 days in office, then of course they are in the driver's seat. There are some inconveniences, but they are in the driver's seat. And it is our duty, it is our civic right to begin to ask the questions, no matter how inconvenient they are. And in this regard, I am kicking it off with the education. It's a priority. The president spoke of it, and I'm kicking it off. I'm starting the ball rolling on education. I'm really beginning on education, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? The president said the primary objective of the new direction, ladies and gentlemen, the primary objective of the new direction is to increase access to free and quality, free quality primary, secondary, vocational, technical, and university education, which will enable them, I suppose, the students, those that will benefit from that free quality primary, secondary, vocational, and university education, to make a meaningful contribution to the society, economically and constructively engage in activity which will help to lift our nation up the doldrums of poverty and make it a shining beacon, or as Mr. Allison said when he wrote a long time ago in a West Africa magazine, restore the country's height in terms of education, which was the pride of the citizenry and the respect and envy of others outside, the Athens of West Africa. In doing so, this is increased, following his new direction, he said he will therefore increase. He will therefore increase and sustain budgetary allocation to education, which will constitute or make up 20%, minimum 20% of the national GDP. That sounds good. Because if you're coming up with a project, then of course you have to allocate it, because there's a fiscality behind it. There's a fiscal responsibility, obligation, if you like. So you have to appropriate the budget for it. And in this regard, the current sitting president, retired Brigadier H.E. Julius Malabio, has said that he will appropriate 20% of the budget in terms of the national GDP. That will go towards his educational project, where the new direction, or which the new direction makes a priority. It's also said that it's going to change the current educational system. You know, the current one is 6344, ladies and gentlemen. He said he's going to change it to 6334. Now, this is not my area of expertise. I've just done a basic research that the system is going to be changed from that of 6344 to 6334. But there must be a reason beyond this why it is going to be changed to that. But he's giving some of the reasons as well. He said that the classrooms in the current 6344 is inadequate. Teachers are also inadequate. In other words, teachers as per classroom of students are not equivalent. So are the classrooms. So therefore, you might find, I suppose that's what they're saying, jammed classrooms, packed classrooms. And the system, the current system, according to him, is having an impact on teenage pregnancies. I don't know whether they've done a report on that, or probably it's in the 136 page report. I haven't read it in its entirety. I just read the objective, the, how do you call it? The executive summary, and mainly the first 36 pages, I would say, because I wanted a summary of it to do what I did last week in terms of my broadcast. But I'm not sure whether they've done a report on this, where they have arrived at the 6344 is having an impact on teenage pregnancies. Okay? They didn't stop there. He said it will increase. Okay, my throat is beginning to get dry now. I don't have my water with me. And again, ladies and gentlemen, just to bring this up, I had a drink last week and a brother was saying that I'm drinking while broadcasting. Come on. Why shouldn't I? Okay, I'm just broadcasting. Why shouldn't I? And if you want to talk about professionalism, this is not CNN. This is just a talk show. And if you're watching, please try to understand that. Okay. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, the president said that the 6344, which is the current educational system in the country as we speak, has inadequate classroom and teachers, is impacting on teenage pregnancies, and it doesn't show any proof that learning is being improved. Again, interesting. I don't know whether it forms part of the 136-page GTT report, but this is quite interesting. He said that relevant authorities along the way, during this period, will advise when this new policy will be initiated. That is the 6334. So he's coming off the current system of 6344 and will be initiating based on the advice of the relevant authorities when to enact this, when to put this into place, the 6334. Okay. Now, these are some of the things, according to him, the 6334 policy will highlight. He says that these are things that he's going to do under 6334. He's going to increase contractual hours. He's going to eliminate the two-shift system, which I will take to represent the morning and afternoon. I don't know why. Maybe it's the same thing again that they came up with, the impacting of teenage pregnancies. But I have one thing to say at the end of this. He also said, eliminating the two-shift system. Okay, and he will compensate that with building additional classrooms. He will build additional classrooms to compensate the two-shift system. So instead of students coming on a two-shift basis, they will come, maybe on a one-shift basis, because the additional classrooms will be able to accommodate those that will be denied the second shift pattern. Well, good for them. During my primary school days, and this brings back fond memories. That was when I was in Cathedral Boys School. I was in the afternoon session. Yes, I went to afternoon school at Cathedral Boys School. And we didn't know much of the difference then. And I don't know why it was then. Was it because of overflowing classrooms? Was the idea prevalent then? Or was it because of other reasons? I will try to look into this and see why was it. But I know that I went to an afternoon school whilst I was in Cathedral Boys School. That was to change later because I went again to morning school. But at some point, I attended afternoon school. I think I've got 1 or 2 friends on the channel now that we went to Cathedral Boys School together as well. Julian Osborne, are you watching? Augustus Newstead, are you watching? These are people I went to primary school with, and sometimes they are on the forum. So you will eliminate and compensate that with the additional building of classrooms. The pinnacle of the announcement by the president came by saying, effective from September 2018, that's the next academic year, which is soon upon us. We are in July, August, September. In 2 months' time, he said his government will introduce free education. But that begs the question again as to what kind of free education are we talking about? Sounds very good on pen and paper. What kind of free education are we talking about? But we will continue to monitor this. That's why I say we are going to be asking the president or the government as a whole. Yes, Timo Sachs, how are you, brother? How are you doing? I hope all is well. It's been a while. We'll talk. Hopefully, I will call you tomorrow so we can have a brief chat. And Mr. Sekou John, you're just joining. Sister Sarah Wula Tarawali, welcome to the program. I haven't seen you for a while, but all the same, you're welcome. I wish you would have been in from the beginning. As usual, I was speaking truth to power, and I will just say this again, one final time, because I'm just summarizing now. Some of us, in my opinion, think that we've rushed to judgment in terms of the 90-100 days period, in terms of the way we characterize it or categorize it. We rushed to judgment. We started, running a litmus test on fail and not fail. No, the honeymoon period is meant to represent a period in which the transition takes place. It's a transformational process. I gave an example by saying when you transition from, or your child transition from kindergarten to primary, or from primary to secondary, there's a period that they need to settle in. It's the same thing in governance. There's a period that they need to settle in. So we can't use that to say that that's the test. No, I don't agree at all. But what I do know now, that after the 90 days, 100 days honeymoon period, it all ends here. And we are going to now beginning to hold the government accountable for what happens, what they do, how they do what they do. So I started this off with the education, in which they promised free education, switching from a 6344 to 6344. So currently we have 6344 and we are switching to a 6334 sort of educational policy. Free education will be upon us in September. And then I gave a brief history how we were once known as the Athens of West Africa. For everything that this government do for me beginning today, that's when I begin to hold them accountable. And I've opened the salvo with education. Mr. President, this is what you said that you are going to do in terms of education. What are the priorities? I've read it, here inside out. And I'm just waiting to see how this is going to pan out. I know, for example, that in reverting to 6334 policy, of course, I've said it, you're going to increase contractual hours, eliminate two-shift system, build additional classroom, and effective next academic year, of course, free education is going live. 2018 September, free education is live. You've already brokered deals with your international and donor partners who have expressed support and commitment to this your project. Okay, you've also set up a committee to establish a high-level interministerial and partnership. That's 2 committees and another one, which is a technical group and relevant in terms of performance with other agencies. That's MDs and etc. I can also say from readings I've done, you have embarked on reviewing the educational security planning. You've asked to strengthen the information system, because you believe that to improve education is a fiscal liability. So therefore, you've appropriated 20% of your government's or of national GDP to fund this policy. I also know that you are promising to develop capacity of school inspectorate. You are trying to depoliticize the board of governors of school. That is, you're trying to restore some kind of reputation to the school governorate by depoliticizing it, developing capacity for school inspectorate, respect the national autonomy of students, promote social dialogue, and one of the greatest assets that teachers have is to be rewarded or to be recognized. In these instances, like I said, from the late 1970s and 1980s, it just deteriorated. They were not recognized. You say you're going to recognize them and they're going to be rewarded. You're going to raise the morale of teachers. And this is a presidential initiative that matters relating to teachers will be given priority. Okay? The best teacher award scheme to most initiative will be highlighted. Free education for university education for 3 children of every school teacher will be paid by for this government. Free education, university level, for 3 children of every school teacher will be paid for by this government. Student loan scheme for deserving students, teacher training campuses in every district, and will be stretched out to every other little hamlet later. Prepare for the anticipated increase in school enrollment because of free education by a policy being devised, like one admin section, 1 primary school, and 1 electoral constituency, 1 secondary school, and things like that. Expand on school feeding program in conjunction with others. Introduce school bus system with less than the prevailing price. Promote basic literacy program for all adults. Every district, it will be extended to. Review the curriculum, develop national apprenticeship scheme, and so forth and so on. It's a long, long document. And this is a tall order that this president or this government have set themselves. So it is now our responsibility, ladies and gentlemen, to begin to hold the SLPP government into account. Now I'm a policy analyst. That's my strength. That's what I studied. I cannot, phantom the fact that if you embark on a policy, and we did a broadcast several weeks ago, there are things that you have to conduct. There are things that you have to do. Consultation process, and looking into what exists, what's the nature of what exists, why do we want to do it, who is doing it, who are going to be the benefactors, and all of this takes time. It takes time, rather. And at some point, we have to bring it out, like a pilot scheme, and see how it works slowly before finally phasing it out into the general public. But I haven't seen any of this at all. It seems more political. And I don't want to politicize it at this earlier stage, because on pen and paper, it does sound really good. And I pray that it works. Because if it works, then of course the country benefits, our children benefits, and the country is taken out of the doldrums of poverty, because then people are learning. But there are things, this is why you can project things, because there are things that are meant to be done the way they are supposed to be done. Once they are not done in that structure, then they are bound to fail. They are bound to fail. But then we will give benefit of the doubt by waiting and see how it comes out. But having said this, ladies and gentlemen, I think I've said enough. We've just hit the 1 hour and 40 mark. And let's not forget that beginning today, we are going to be scrutinizing every policy by this government. We are going to hold them accountable. And I know that they know that there is nothing wrong. There is nothing really wrong in holding them accountable. After all, they are the leaders. They don't expect us to be holding other people responsible for the governance of the country. We have to hold them who are running the country responsible. Okay? So today we've talked about education. Next week, I want to talk about the political history of Sierra Leone within the context of the genesis of corruption within the civil services. But we'll also hint at another policy of the government or something else that they had in their manifesto. This government has spoken a lot in a short period of time, and I wish them well. But we will ask them all of the inconvenient questions along the way. We'll not shy away from that. That is our responsibility. What they've said on pen and paper, ladies and gentlemen, undoubtedly, there's all the hallmarks of good governance. There is no doubt about that, okay? The president has spoken and will attempt to talk about the financial side of things. You know, you will know what the financial side of things means. So we are going to attempt to talk about it. We know that there are 14 licensed banks in the country. And out of those 14 licensed banks in the country, only one of them is outrightly, truly, exclusively owned by the government and people of Sierra Leone. And that's the Sierra Leone Commercial Bank. There's another one, the Rokel Bank, which is partially owned, and probably maybe a quarter of it owned by the government and people of Sierra Leone. So that in itself implies that explicitly, implicitly, 12 others are actually owned by foreign nationals. 12 others. And the foreign-owned banks dominate 75% of our financial sector assets. But there's so much to talk about that we'll be busy in the next coming weeks and months until the 5 years is up. This is what we are going to be talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, in behalf of the then and now, I want to say thank you so much to all of you for tuning in. I have to let you go.